Good morning, everyone in Seoul, Korea, Asia. Good evening to everybody in the United States. Good day to everybody around the world. I'm Mark Lippert. We are here at the behest of the Korea Foundation, really talking about all of the importance of KBO in public diplomacy. This is a very special week in Korea. They've done it now for, I think we're going on year 3, really highlighting important elements of Korean culture that play into what I used to do for a living, engage in the very, I think, special and important art of public diplomacy. So with that, welcome to everybody. And we have an all-star panel here today to talk about my favorite subject, KBO. My mom used to say all I did was in Korea as ambassador was eat chicken, drink beer, and go to KBO games. Guilty as charged because I love the sport so much. But it does, the humor aside, it does underscore a more serious point here, which is KBO is a critical element of Korean culture that not only binds the US and Korea closer together, but also really highlights Korea to the world, especially the baseball-loving world. So with that, let's get into it, as they say. And we've got 3 very special guests, and I'm going to take them in turn. First, I'm going to introduce Dan Kurtz. Anybody who knows KBO knows Dan Kurtz. He is the founder of mykbo.net. It also has a corresponding app and Twitter handle as well. Dan is really an expert on Korean baseball. He goes deep. He is really well-versed in the players, the statistics, the implications, and he also is just a lot of fun in pointing out, has a lot of fun with it, in pointing out all of the different cultural elements at play in KBO too. So Dan, welcome to the broadcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. It's truly an honor. Anytime that I can talk about the KBO, I love it. So I am honored to be here and part of this panel.
Excellent. Welcome, Dan. 환영합니다. All right, let's go to Eric Hacker next, our player. The pride of Duncanville, Texas, former MLB player, Pirates, Twins, Giants, former KBO player, the Dinos, the Heroes, 6 seasons, 61-37 record, really impressive record in KBO, 3.66 ERA, and I would also underscore that was really in the juiced ball era, the live ball era, so that there should be a weighted average to that ERA. Eric, amazing career in KBO, and we'll get into it a little bit in a second. You're also known for your passion, your embrace of Korean culture as well. So Eric, welcome to the broadcast.
안녕하십니까. Thanks,
Mark.
Thanks for the introduction. It's an honor to be on the panel with you guys. Like Dan said, anytime that I think any of us that love the KBO and we love Korea, it's, if we can get in the same room and speak to KBO with others, it's a lot of fun. Mark and I go way back. When he came to throw the first pitch with NC, we gave him a few tips. I don't know if it worked, but we gave him a few tips. We might have given him a few wrong tips since he's a Doosan fan, but that's all right. We thank you for what you do, Mark, and I'm honored to be on.
Thanks to Eric, and we're so proud of your work in the KBO, not just as baseball fans, but as Americans. You were a true cultural ambassador and a great player, nonetheless. And you're sporting the NC jersey today. We love that. Love it. Love it. Love it. All right. Last but not least, Dave Sheinin. And Dave is a really well-known sports journalist of great stature here in the United States. He's the national baseball correspondent for the Washington Post, and he covers the entire league for one of the few national papers in the United States. And really, his printed word, his analysis drives thinking in and around MLB. Dave has been with the Post since 1999. He's a graduate of Vanderbilt University. And perhaps most importantly for the Ungwanga crowd, the fan cheering crowd, he studied music and studied as an opera singer at Vanderbilt. So I think we've got to get him to a game and get him out doing a couple of cheer songs. So with that great intro of, with that intro of our great panelists, let's get into it, as they say. I'm just going to spend one more second here talking about the history of the league for those who don't follow KBO closely, because it is important, and it also dovetails with a lot of the development and democracy story of Korea and Korea's emergence as a global cultural force on the world stage. History of the league, the KBO itself, newish, 1982. Baseball is not new to Korea. In fact, there are newspaper reports of going back late 19th century of expats playing games in Seoul against the Seoul Athletic Club, against the United States Marine Corps guards that were there at the American legation. 1920s, MLB actually had a goodwill tour in Korea, in Asia as well. The Korean War brought baseball in earnest to Korea. There was an extant fan base there. The American influx of men, material, also brought with it baseball en masse, and that started to build up the fan base. Fast forward to the 70s, 80s, and you get the Koreans doing well on international tournaments. That further fueled the fan base. You have the semi-pro industrial league that developed, and lo and behold, 1982, here comes KBO. 6 teams evolved into the 10-team league we know today, and it really brings us to the point of departure for our panelists here. And I also would be remiss if I also didn't say that 1994 is also an important moment. Park Chan-ho playing in MLB, first Korean player. All of this comes together and brings us to where we are today. So with that, I'm going to turn to Dan Kurtz. Dan, special league, special cultural moment for Korea. This season particularly special. ESPN broadcast daily in the United States. Can you just give us a little recap of the season, and also tell us why this season has been particularly special from the vantage point of someone who's followed the league for many, many years now?
Sure. Well, 2020 has just been a different kind of year for literally the entire world. And to couple that with the KBO, 2020 has just been different, awesome, some sad parts with fans not being there. But the fact is, ESPN is being broadcast on the world sports leader, which they call themselves ESPN. So everywhere around the world with ESPN's platform, fans are able to have tuned in and watched a game from this 2020 season. And what a season this has been. We had the NC Dinos finishing first place. They basically went start to finish and are advancing to the Korean series. We had seeding for the playoffs come down to the very last day, which does not always happen in every season in the KBO. And then just the fact is that the KBO has played a 144 game schedule, which is a full regular schedule. And during these COVID pandemic times, a lot of people didn't know if that was going to happen. But the fact that the league never shut down due to a positive COVID test since May and played all 144 games for each team is amazing. And the fact is now fans are going to start coming back to the stadium up to about 50% for the playoffs. I mean, starting back in May 5th, as a fan here in the United States, I had no clue if the KBO was going to even finish the season. So to jump now to the postseason time, and now you're having 50% of the fans come back to the stadium, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome for the fans in Korea. It's going to be awesome for the new fans around the world that have started to like the league and follow the league, because when the fans are in the stands, the KBO is like no other league in itself.
Well, I can attest to that. And Dan, thanks for the insight and analysis. Let me just have one quick follow-up. Your app, your blog, your Twitter handle, I noticed a jump in followers. I've noticed ESPN commentators using and following along the game using your tools, for lack of a better term. Tell us about what this has meant for you, someone who has really promoted Korean baseball through these tools. What's happened with those tools? And second, just a quick question of curiosity. Within the United States, any regional variance between different pockets of fandom in the United States? For example, does the Southeast like the Dinos, or are you seeing more popularity in Korean baseball in, say, California or LA or something of that nature?
Sure. Well, as a fan who has followed the league for about 20 years, the fact that with ESPN now picking up the league, and I have a website at mykbo.net, and on opening day, which nobody knew was going to be happening on ESPN until the day before, on opening day in the KBO, my website basically crashed due to the newfound fandom from around sports-starved fans in the United States and around the world that just wanted to do some live sports. And the KBO came back and was broadcast on live television. So that played a huge part in fans coming to the website. And I have definitely seen an increase in followers and people following the league and people tweeting at me on social media, just people stating, say, hey, I'm from, state X, or I'm from country X, and I just started watching the KBO baseball league. What's it about? And so I think it's been great for the league. It's been great as a fan. I've been honored to appear on multiple broadcasts for ESPN, which, I'm still pinching myself that even happened because I just consider myself a fan. But when I take a look at some of the analytics, like I said, my website crashed on opening day because we had 25 times more traffic for the 2020 opening day than last year's opening day in 2019. And that traffic has stayed steady. Now with sports coming back across the world, we have seen a steady decline, but not to the amount that I thought it was going to be. And in fact, here in the month of October, traffic has actually started to increase again. So I think that's a good sign because that means fans are getting into the playoffs. And then just speaking specifically about the United States and where the traffic has been coming from, some of the more popular metropolitan areas such as New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, Philadelphia, they've been a huge traffic drivers to the site. And then for the states, you got the West Coast, California, Washington State being interested. You have the New York, New Jersey area being very interested in the KBO, according to my website. And then even in the Midwest, Illinois jumping up there as well. So it's been very interesting to see where all the fans have been coming from United States and jumping on to the KBO here in this 2020 season.
All right, excellent. I think I'm going to underscore the point that's very interesting in terms of the stickiness of the fans. In other words, you've seen a little bit of a decline as the sports world opened back up, but there's been a residual stickiness with the fan support, which is interesting coming back in October. I'll just say this, guilty as charged with my own viewing habits. I got a little bit angry at the Bears in September, August, but I've rebounded here in October. So maybe I'm reflective of your demographic, and maybe they're all Doosan fans. Okay, let me go to Dave Sheinin next. Dave, you just heard Dan talk about the year it still is, quite frankly, for KBO. The impact it's had in the United States, websites crashing. Dan Kurtz can't walk down the streets without autograph seekers chasing him. What, broader context, you've talked about this before, I've heard you, even your editor at the Post has become a KBO fan. Can you just talk a little bit about the impact in the United States, MLB, that nexus, the world in which you populate day to day?
Yeah, I can tell you that I've felt a growing awareness of the KBO here in the States that really I could trace back to the era story in 2017 when he came over and was just on fire. And, I wrote a big piece about him and every other outlet in America did. His story was inseparable from the KBO. The roots of his rise in his time back through MLB, are straight out of what he experienced and learned in Korea. So I think it started there, and this spring, I absolutely felt as if the KBO was pushed over the top by the ESPN broadcast, and I was hearing from people all the how cool it was, and I'll be honest, even in doing the story on Eric Thames, it's not as if I watched a whole lot of KBO. I would see just to check out on YouTube as I was researching the story, but when it was really starting to watch some of those games, and I'll be honest, I didn't catch many first innings because of the time difference, but I caught a lot of ninth innings and my editor was watching it and loved it, and seeing it in action. I think a lot of people really fell in love with it from that. There's so many subtle differences, or maybe even not so subtle differences between that game and the game in the U.S. That just, it was fascinating. I think a lot of people had their eyes open to, number one, the quality of play. Number two, the entertainment value of it, especially at a point, early on when we were starved for live entertainment here. We had not started up, and it filled a void. And I absolutely felt as if, there was behind the KBO, and it definitely got on the map in the U.S. in a way it had not before.
And Dave, just touch on that a little bit. The point, let me draw you out, excuse me. The point about some of the differences and Americans embracing those differences. You're a real, true life, true blue baseball expert. Can you talk about some of that, those differences and the embracing of said differences?
Yeah, I mean, I think that anybody who is interested in having their horizons on what they know is going to look at that and notice immediately the differences. Baseball is baseball on the field, more or less. I mean, it's still 60 feet 6 inches from the mound to home plate, 90 feet between the bases. But you would take note of some of the pitchers, some of the different batting styles of the hitters. I mean, in America right now, you guys probably know this, but we're in the midst of a transformation of the game that's versus power, and we're all about strikeouts and home runs and walks, and the ball is in play less than ever, and it's really kind of an existential crisis of sorts. Major League Baseball, because it's taken a lot of the excitement out of the game. The ball is not in play; is in play less than ever before. In the KBO, you start to take note of pitchers who 90 and hitters who are not swinging for the fences, and the ball's in play a lot more. I'm sure there are stats. Dan, you probably have access to stats about balls in play, but I'm guaranteed the ball is in play more, and there's play in that league than there is in MLB, to be frank. And so that's a big part of it. From it was what goes on in the stands. Once you started having fans back there, and the cheers and the songs, and to me it was just it was so and cool to see. And I also have to credit Mark, for turning me on to some of that as well in our interview when I wrote about your experiences there, and that helped me a lot. And just how cool it was, and that was something that I think a lot of people in America had their eyes open to this year.
No, great stuff, Dave, and really appreciate it. And I think your piece on Eric Thames about the Korean Enlightenment really, I think, drew a lot of eyeballs retroactively and got people thinking about the nexus between the culture and the sport. I'll just say one thing before I go to Eric, one thing on the little differences, ties in KBO, and I'll just give a funny anecdote. I'm sitting there, I took the British ambassador to a baseball game, and I said, oh, it's in extra innings. He goes, well, are there ties? And I was new to KBO. I said, oh, no, there's no ties in KBO. And then all of a sudden, the game ended. It was a tie. We were still drinking beers. He goes, what happened? It's over. I said, I don't know. And he said, well, maybe there's a problem with the wickets, the cricket joke. Anyway, so the trilateral cultural moment there. But I do love the ties actually too as well. So Eric, Dave talked about Eric Thames, his Korean Enlightenment piece, talked about this nexus. You lived that journey as well, and you have been on the record publicly as saying your play improved when you embraced Korean culture. Can you talk about that piece and, quite frankly, pick up on any of the other threads that Dan and Dave put out there? Because you're our player, you lived there for many years, you embraced the culture, and you excelled at the sport in Korea.
Yeah, so when I jumped over to the KBO in 2013, I was like a lot of these other guys. You felt like you weren't getting your opportunity to play in the major leagues, and there's a lot of different things that fall into those things for guys, right? And it could be a many of different reasons. And for myself, I just decided that I wanted an opportunity to, be somewhere and be somebody that somebody valued. And when the KBO team started recruiting me, I didn't buy into it at first, and I was had my mind more set on the Japan opportunities, and didn't know a whole lot about the KBO. But more I learned about it, it became more interesting to me. So let's fast forward, jumped into the KBO, and when I got there, I was still mentally kind of stuck in what was going to make me successful in the U.S. And I wasn't prepared. I was just on an airplane, on a bus ride. I'm in Seoul driving to Masan, and I'm looking around thinking, where am I? I haven't been educated on any of this. And so I was kind of thrown into the fire. And so I kind of I had to learn, and a lot of people don't know this, but the Dinos were a brand new team in the KBO at this point, and so they were learning as well. And so I got there, and I felt like I was trying to be Eric in the U.S. instead of being Eric on what I needed to do to be successful in the KBO. And my first month, maybe even 2 months in the KBO, I was not very good at all. And I had to make adjustments very quickly. I mean, I was even brought into the office and said, "Hey, Eric, we're going to pull you out of the rotation, and we're going to put you in the bullpen. We're going to see if you can close, because the rotation's not working for you." And it was like a gut punch. And I was like, and I stood up for myself. I said, "No, I'm not going to do that." And I said, "I'll tell you right now, if you look at the history of what I do, I'll make the adjustments. You have to buy into me. You have to trust me. I will figure this out." And so I just started doing a lot of studying and figuring out what was going to make me successful. And the first thing that I went to, and it's funny that Brandon Knight is still involved in the KBO. I started watching video on Brandon Knight because our stuff played in the same categories. And I started seeing what he was doing, and it started to make sense to me. And so I started bringing a lot of what he was doing into my game, with a lot of other people, right? Started studying the game. And really, to answer your question, Mark, what really started to kind of separate myself is I had made a decision that I either was going to figure it out on my own, or I was going to be sent back to the U.S. And because of the language barrier, you kind of have to take matters into your own hands. And probably if I would have done that in the U.S., I probably would have had more success in the U.S. as well. But when I did that, it also mentally turned me, like, it was a family thing too. And my wife and I had discussions about, we're all in here, right? We're going to accept this culture. We're going to dive into it. We're going to make, our living was going to be what we wanted to be. We spent, a lot of extra time and money and effort to make home. And that stuff really helped too. We turned Korea into home for us. And that's when things really started to take off to me, on top of really putting my head into the studying of the game and the analytics and data of the game. I studied lots of film on a lot of different guys in the KBO. And I started realizing what made a right-hander successful in the KBO and what would make a left-hander successful in the KBO. And you can even go and look over the last several years, and you can look at like some of the best left-handers and some of the best right-handers in the league. And a lot of those guys do a lot of the same things, and they pitch a lot alike. And I started to see that. And I started saying, I can do that same thing. And when I started to do that with what makes Eric great, I started to be more successful and became one of the better players in the KBO.
That's really interesting. So for baseball fans, you went deep. I'll just say this as a fan, I love that explanation on the technical side, if you will. Talk to us then on the cultural side. You alluded to it, that your family went all in. What did that translate? Were you, eating budae jjigae? Were you, doing certain things? Like, how did you embrace the Korean culture? And then a little bit about that switch, right? You started to say, okay, I feel like I am now into it. When was it? I'm no longer Eric, the American, driving in a bus through Seoul to Mazan. I'm Eric, expat, but with a much deeper understanding of this culture and a love for it, and that's sort of creating this virtuous cycle, as you say.
Yeah, I think it was a balance. It was a balance for us because, you know, when I say we had to make home, it was bringing everything, ordering things from the U.S., you know, making our bed hours, our food hours, our, you know, I mean, from the toiletries and anything that we needed. If we couldn't find it, we just either had it shipped or we'd order it from the U.S. and that made home for us. But really diving into the culture, it was really when you're on the streets and when you're in restaurants and when you're doing, you know, getting in and out of taxis and hotels, like really seeing what they do and just doing what they do instead of doing what I felt was right here in the U.S. because we're talking two completely different cultures here. Language, the way that we speak, we act, you know, our manners and all that is different. And so when I really embraced the manners of the KBO and the manners of Korea, and I say KBO because, you know, you have manners that are on the field and the way you respect the older players and the coaches and the managers and the staff members and the men and the women in the ballpark. You know, you kind of had to have the manners and it was amazing when you did that. They loved you even more. And the players and the KBO players that don't take the effort to do that, I mean, you see it time and time again in Korea. They just don't last. And it's no different than really anywhere else, whether you're in the U.S. or in Korea or in Japan or Taiwan or anywhere else in the country. You know, if you don't embrace what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish as a team, as a player, as an individual, it's not going to go well. And that's really where my family really started to enjoy Korea. My daughter, my oldest, was born in Korea. And she's a Chuseok baby. She was born on Chuseok in 2013. And so, you know, it's just Korea is so close to us. It's home for us. You know, lots and lots of great memories, but it was really just trying to be one of them. I mean, I'm still Eric, right? And our family's still us, but you can still get on the streets and you can get on an elevator and you can go into a restaurant and you can have the manners like they do and they love you for it.
That's great stuff, Eric. And I'll I'll make a comment here in that the culture is at first it seems really difficult because the language is tough. It does seem different. But what I would say is there's such an embrace, right? When you embrace the culture, there's such reciprocation by the Korean people. And I think you captured that so well in terms of once you don't abandon who you are, but if you embrace the culture, it propels you in a direction in Korea. And I think that's what's so interesting here. All right, well, let me turn to Dan here because Eric
I want to add one thing on the field in the KBO that really helped me too, is I had made a decision for myself that I was going to kind of be the yes man, you know, and a lot of foreign players, they'll go and they'll say, you know, oh, I'm not pitching longer. I'm not going to throw 120 pitches. I'm not going to pitch on short rest. I'm not going to do that. And when you start doing that, it really doesn't matter how good you are. You're going to have a bad rep for yourself, and they will not respect you for that. And, you know, in 2015, when I won the Golden Glove, I think I threw 205 innings or something, 220 innings once the postseason was over. And it was I just turned into like the yes man. If they would come to the mound in the seventh and they'd say, Eric, how are you feeling? Are you tired? I say, I'm tired, but I'll give you everything I got. And if it was 130 pitches, if it was 90 pitches, I would give them everything I had, and they loved me for it.
Yeah, that's a great point. So much in Korea is effort and attitude. That's well put. And my problem is I said yes to too much Korean food and beer and ended up gaining about 20 pounds when I was there. But hey, it was worth it. All right, Dan, back to you. The question that I have is pick up on what Eric just said about these cultural nuances in the sport. You have featured some of them on your website. Apology of the day. You have bat flips, but Eric talks a little bit about the seniority and the how to relate with the players and basically build team cohesion. Dan, can you walk us through elements of that from your perspective at KBO?
Sure. As somebody, I was adopted from South Korea, so I did not grow up in the Korean culture. So I have learned it myself after meeting my wife. We both met at Yonsei University. Her family has shown me how, and I've learned what I'm supposed to do as in the Korean cultures. So coming from that perspective, this kind of the outside and learning it for the last 20 years, now taking that to the KBO and the baseball field and what I see as a baseball fan, because I grew up as a Major League Baseball fan, and just seeing some of those differences with the KBO. One thing that stands out to me that a lot of I think some of the guys coming from North America don't really realize is how big a deal is like when you maybe go out and pitch your first complete game as a foreign pitcher, you then go maybe the next day or the following day, you go out and you maybe buy pizza or buy coffee for the entire team. So you got like 60, iced coffees waiting at the locker room for the players, or, you hit the game winning home run, or you win some kind of like monthly award, you get some of that money, and you take some of that money and you treat the entire team and staff to something such as like a hamburger combo meal, or like I said, pizza, coffee, just those little things that I think some of the guys coming from North American baseball maybe don't even realize that, like, wow, I didn't realize how big a thing that is, because honestly, depending if they're in the major leagues, a lot of that, all the food and spread is basically provided for you. But when you go to the KBO, it's a little bit different. But just that little sign of saying, hey, I'm looking, let's celebrate my accomplishment as a team, as a group. It goes a long way in the locker room from everything that I hear. And there's some other nuances, like you said. I do show on my Twitter feed some occasional things, such as the apology of the D. So when you hit a batter, if you are not taking it, depending on the age and the status in the league, if you're a younger pitcher and you happen to hit a veteran batter, if you were not taking off your hat and bowing and just showing that sign of respect as an apology, meaning it's not intentional, if you don't do that, benches can empty. In fact, I remember just like 2-3 years ago, in fact, featuring Dusan, one of the LG guys hit, I think, Fernandez. And the dugouts there just the Dusan dugouts just chirping at the young kid going, hey, you got to take your head off. And if you're not, I mean, they were yelling back and forth, whereas, new fans to the league may be going, what's going on here? So whereas maybe a bat flip in the major leagues will get you a beanball and benches empty, if you're not bowing and showing respect on the baseball field in the KBO, benches may empty as well.
That's so interesting. So your point, I mean, not your broader points, obviously there are these nuances of the game that Eric alluded to, but your concrete examples are so interesting in a way almost opposite from MLB, right? Bowing after hitting someone, showing some respect based on age, that is required in KBO. Bat flips, which would bring a lot of ire in MLB, are allowed, permitted, celebrated, right? So that's quite interesting. So those nuances on how to behave on the field, which you capture very well in your Twitter feed. I'm going to come to Dave Sheinin, because we're starting to run a little bit out of time here. Dave, we've seen this year, and I think Dan has highlighted on his feed, I think Daniel Kim has also highlighted, another big KBO. We've seen now head-to-head matchups with some former KBOers in MLB, pitching duels. We've now seen, I wouldn't say a critical mass, but a growing number of either Korean players who've come directly to the MLB through minor league system, and or now the posting system with KBO, or just contracts expiring in the case of some foreign players, and folks like Josh Lindblom coming back. Talk to us about the impact of Korean players, or people or former KBOers on MLB. And I guess I would underscore it by, we had yet another Korean player, Chae Ji-man, in the World Series, if I'm not mistaken, this year as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the perfect way to start this. you know, Choi was one of the breakout stars, I guess, of the series and of this postseason. You know, overshadowed certainly by Randy Arozarena from Cuba for the Rays, but a lot of people were talking about Choi by the end of the series, and you know, he was another. I think that was another major, you know, breakthrough and a major moment for baseball in this league, and a lot of people fell in love with that guy and the joy he played the game with. You know, I also think that we should probably highlight the World Baseball Classic, you know, that over the years that has showcased South Korea's, you know, wonderful players and team. And that was, I think, another stone that brought this all together. And I've covered a couple of those and have always walked away so impressed with the Korean team. But yeah, I do think that all things together mean something. And I do think that what we're going to see in the future is much more of this. I think we're going to see many American players aware of the KBO, and a lot more players, you know, willing to go over there, who are intrigued by it, who now know about it, who have names and faces to put to it. And I think that the walls are slowly, you know, crumbling between them. And I'm, you know, I don't know that we're ever going to get to a point where the flow of talent back and forth, but we're certainly getting to the point where it's not going to be so novel anymore for an Eric Thames or a Josh Lindblom or like that to go over there, have success, and come back. And from the same in the other direction from Choi and players like him coming straight here from Korea, it's not going to be so novel anymore.
And Dave, impact on the actual game of this talent pool, not just Korean players, but Asian players. I guess you can argue for the last 20 years, although it's changing, and I want to get to that in our closing moments, Korea, Japanese baseball, and to a lesser extent, baseball played in Taiwan have influenced each other. And there's a certain element of that game that has been brought into MLB. Your thoughts and observations of that export of out of Asia, import into MLB element as well?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there is or at least there was, you know, a level of mystery and, you know, just the unknown, the novelty. But that's sort of going away now as well. And those who come over are just great players. You know, I mean, I have to say that Ichiro from Japan is probably, you know, celebrated player in America. And there was a time when, you know, there was nobody bigger. There was no bigger superstar, no bigger global superstar in baseball than Ichiro. I mean, that's an amazing thing to recognize.
Yeah, I mean, you really are seeing the pickup of the Asian game. I on a more humorous note, I would just quickly say that I remember I was ambassador. Our embassy nurse, who's a huge baseball fan, Yonsei grad, by the way, Dan, came up to me and she said, "Mark, did you hear about the Kim Hyun-soo, the day of Kim Hyun-soon at Camden Yards?" And I'm like, "The day of Kim Hyun-soon?" And then I looked it up. Oh, bobblehead day. And my point was that a great player in KBO has now made it to mass cultural appeal in the United States, right? When you make it to bobblehead day status, that's something. So I think it's to your point, Dave, like there's this respect, popularity of the Asian players, the Korean players writ large in the United States that's growing. It's not a novelty anymore. It's just part of it's starting to be stitched into the fabric. All right, we are basically out of time.
It's also performance, Mark. I mean, it's also performance, you know. I mean,
Great
these
point.
guys are good. You know, if they came over here and just were entertaining and failed, you know, that's one thing, but they're coming over here and crushing it, you know. So that's, I mean, you can't deny talent.
That's a great point. And it's a point that I frequently drive by because I've seen the league and I've seen the high quality of the players, and I kind of build it into my assumptions. And it's new-ish in MLB that these guys come over here and excel, right? Obviously, Park Chan-ho was the first. There more have followed, but there's now been a generation and a half or two almost of these players that have excelled in MLB and been stitched into the fan culture. That's a great point. All right, we're basically out of time. I did want to just say one quick thing back to Eric. Eric, really quickly, fan culture so unique in Korea, impact on players on the field.
Yeah, I mean the fan experience is incredible. You know, I embrace it as probably more than most. I mean, I would encourage the players, Korean players, foreign players, all to embrace the fans. I mean, you know, I'm excited to hear that the 50% capacity is coming in the postseason here. I think the fans here in the U.S. are going to get a sample of what it's like in the KBO. You know, I'm really excited about that. I mean, the fan experience is awesome. I mean, there is not a place that is louder than a KBO playoff game. When the game is on the line, I mean, I've pitched in some elimination games on the road that were so incredibly loud that I could not hear myself think, and I loved every bit of it.
That's right. And don't forget in at least in Jamshil, the lifts going up with the mascots, flames coming out. You don't get that anywhere in the world, in addition to all the great fan culture. But in all seriousness, I think we're going to have to close here. We could go on forever. The four of us, we're huge KBO believers. I would also be remiss, I didn't get in one point, but the passing of Lee Kun-hee, the Samsung chairman, and I'm going to hold up the Lions jersey here in his honor, because he was not only brought great economic progress to Korea, not only created one of the world's most iconic brands, but loved his Samsung Lions. And I think just his passing this week was, recently was marked by some fans noting that for the record, and we would be remiss if we didn't pay our respects here to the sports part of his legacy that he leaves behind in Korea. So with that, I'm going to call it. We didn't get to a whole host of things. I wanted to talk about merchandising. See my cross-branded NC Dinos, stuffed animal, my Kia Tigers. Got a whole bunch of fun stuff here that we didn't get to. Hats, jerseys, Porto, Vitamin C, Samsung Lions, cross-branded. Tons of fun stuff with that too. That's a whole nother episode. But I just wanted to say thanks to the panel, thanks to Eric, thanks to Abe, thanks to Dan, excuse me, Dave. Can't talk. I'm getting too excited here. Dave, Dan, Eric, thank you. Thanks to the Korea Foundation for putting this on. Thanks to public diplomacy efforts by the Korea Foundation around the world. And I'll just end on saying this. The alliance is incredibly important between the United States and the Republic of Korea. It's a military alliance. The policy making we do in and around it affects not just the Korean Peninsula, not just Northeast Asia, but the entire world. And what I would say is that the foundation of that is our two peoples, especially in a democracy. And baseball plays a critical part in bringing two seemingly different cultures together, thousands of miles across the Pacific, closer together each and every day. So with that, I'm gonna gavel down and say thanks again to everybody, and looking forward to the future of KBO.
Thank you for having us, Mark. I appreciate it. Korean Foundation. Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Guys.
Good seeing you guys.
I think I ran a little over, so.